Robert F. Kennedy was shot at 12:15 a.m. on June 5, 1968, by 1:44 a.m. He was dead. America woke up that morning to a nightmare that felt impossible. 2 months after Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, another leader, another voice of hope, had been silenced by a bullet. The nation was in shock, in grief, in chaos. And millions of children were watching. They saw their parents crying. They saw the news footage playing on loop, the hotel, the crowd, the stretcher, the blood. They heard words like assassination and tragedy and dead, but didn't understand what any of it meant. They just knew that the grown-ups were scared. And when grown-ups are scared, children become terrified. On the morning of June 6, 1968, less than 24 hours after Robert Kennedy died, every major television network in America returned to regular programming. The cartoons came back on. The game shows resumed. The soap operas continued as if nothing had happened. America wanted to move on, to pretend, to protect children from the horror by simply not talking about it. Every network did this. Every network except one. At 5:30 p.m. on June 6, 1968, Fred Rogers walked onto the set of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and did something no children's television show had ever done before. He looked directly into the camera, and he talked about death, not metaphorically, not with puppets, not with gentle stories about goldfish or hamsters. He talked about assassination, about murder, about a man being shot and dying, about how scary and confusing and sad that was. He used those words on a children's show, on national television. And when the network executives found out what Fred was planning to do, they tried to stop him. But Fred Rogers refused to stay silent because children were scared. And Fred Rogers believed that when children are scared, the worst thing you can do is pretend everything is fine. This is the story of the day Fred Rogers broke every rule of children's television. The day he risked his show, his sponsors, his career to tell children a truth that no one else would say out loud. The day he proved that talking to children honestly about the hardest things in life isn't just important. It's essential. June 5, 1968. Started as a night of celebration. Robert F. Kennedy had just won the California Democratic primary. He was on his way to securing the party's nomination for President of the United States. At the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, Kennedy gave a victory speech to a crowd of jubilant supporters. He talked about unity, about hope, about healing a divided nation. Now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there, he said, flashing that famous Kennedy smile. The crowd erupted in cheers. Kennedy left the podium and walked through the hotel's kitchen pantry, a shortcut to the press room where he was scheduled to give interviews. And that's where Sirhan was waiting. Sirhan was a 24-year-old Palestinian immigrant who believed Kennedy's support for Israel made him an enemy. He'd come to the hotel with a .22 caliber revolver. As Kennedy walked through the pantry, shaking hands with kitchen staff, Sirhan stepped forward and fired. The first bullet hit Kennedy in the head, behind the right ear, the shot that would kill him. Sirhan kept firing. 5 more shots. 5 more people wounded in the chaos. Kennedy fell to the floor. His campaign aide, Paul Schrade, was shot in the head. Reporter I.R. Goldstein was hit. Hotel employees were struck by bullets, and in the pandemonium, the screaming, the blood, the smoke from the gun, someone tackled Sirhan to the ground while others tried to stop the bleeding from Kennedy's head wound. "Is everybody okay?" Kennedy whispered as he lay on the kitchen floor, his head cradled by a busboy named Juan Romero. Those were some of his last coherent words, asking if everyone else was okay. Even as he was dying, Robert F. Kennedy was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons operated for hours, trying to save him. But the damage was too severe. At 1:44 a.m. on June 6, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. He left behind a wife, 11 children, and a nation that had just lost its second major leader to assassination in 2 months. America woke up that morning to the news, and the grief was overwhelming. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Fred Rogers woke up to the same news everyone else did. He turned on the television and saw the footage. The hotel, the chaos, the stretcher carrying Kennedy's body, the tearful reporters, the shocked crowds. Fred sat in his living room and cried, not just because a man had died, but because he knew what this meant for children. They would see this. They would hear about it. Their parents would be crying. The television would be showing disturbing images. Words like shot and killed and assassinated would be everywhere. And no one, absolutely no one in children's television was going to talk to children about what any of this meant. Fred picked up the phone and called the studio. "We need to change today's episode," he said. His producer, a man named Bob Walsh, was confused. "Change it?" "Fred, we're scheduled to tape in 2 hours. We can't change an entire episode." "We have to," Fred interrupted. "Children are going to be terrified. They're going to see their parents crying. They're going to hear about Senator Kennedy being shot. And if we don't talk to them about it, they're going to think it's something too terrible to even mention." Bob was quiet for a moment. "Fred, are you sure? This is assassination. This is politics. This is death. We've never talked about anything like this on a children's show." "I know, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. The network is going to lose their minds. Then they lose their minds. But I'm talking to the children about this." Today, Fred Rogers arrived at the WQED studio at 2 p.m. The crew was already there, setting up for the scheduled episode. Something light, something about music and imagination. Something that had been planned weeks ago. Fred walked in and announced, "We're scrapping today's episode. We're doing something different." The crew exchanged nervous glances. "What are we doing instead?" asked the director. "I'm going to talk to the children about Senator Kennedy, about what happened, about death, about fear, about how to process something this scary." The room went silent. Finally, someone spoke up. "Fred, we can't do that. This is a children's show. You can't talk about assassination on a children's show." "Why not?" Fred asked calmly. "Because it'll scare them. Kids don't need to hear about people getting shot. They don't need to hear about death. We're supposed to protect them from this stuff." Fred looked at the crew member, a young man named Michael, who genuinely believed he was protecting children by keeping them in the dark. "Michael," Fred said gently, "children already know something terrible has happened. They're seeing their parents cry. They're hearing the news. They're feeling the fear in the air. And when we don't talk to them about it, we're not protecting them. We're teaching them that their feelings don't matter, that the scary things they're experiencing are too terrible to even acknowledge." Michael didn't respond. Fred continued, "Children need to know that it's okay to feel scared, that it's okay to feel sad, that it's okay to not understand what's happening. And they need to know that the grown-ups in their lives are going to be honest with them, that we're not going to pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't." The crew was listening now. "So yes," Fred said, "I'm going to talk about Senator Kennedy. I'm going to talk about death. I'm going to talk about how scary this is. Because that's what children need right now. Not cartoons, not distraction, but honesty." The crew looked at each other. Then, slowly, they nodded. "Okay, Fred, let's do it." At 3 p.m., Fred Rogers called the network to inform them of the change. The response was immediate and furious. "Absolutely not." The executive producer of WQED was shouting into the phone. "Fred, you cannot talk about assassination on a children's show. Do you understand what you're suggesting?" Yes, Fred said calmly. I'm suggesting we talk to children honestly about something that's scaring them. Fred, parents are going to freak out. Sponsors are going to pull funding. We could lose the show over this. Then we lose the show. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend nothing happened while children are terrified. Fred, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. What's unreasonable is expecting children to process national tragedy without any adult guidance. What's unreasonable is pretending that if we don't talk about it, children won't notice. They're children, Fred. They don't need to know about this. They already know. They just don't understand. And that's terrifying. My job is to help them understand. The executive tried a different approach. Okay, fine. Talk about it. But don't use the word assassination. Don't talk about guns. Don't talk about death. Keep it vague. Keep it gentle. No. Excuse me? No. If I'm going to talk to children about this, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to use real words. I'm not going to dance around the truth. Fred, you're going to traumatize children. I'm going to validate their feelings. There's a difference. The executive was silent for a long moment. Then he said, if you do this, Fred, you're on your own. The network isn't backing you. If sponsors pull out, if parents complain, if this turns into a disaster, it's on you. I understand. Do you? Because you could lose everything over this. Your show, your career, everything you've built. Fred Rogers was quiet for just a moment. Then he said something that would define his entire philosophy of children's television. If I lose my show because I help children process their fear, then I didn't deserve the show in the first place. And he hung up asterisk at 5:30 p.m. on June 6, 1968. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood aired live. Fred Rogers walked onto the set. No cardigan change. No singing. No trolley. None of the usual rituals, just Fred, in his suit, looking directly at the camera with an expression of profound sadness and compassion. He sat down. And he spoke. Asterisk. Hello, friends. I'm sure that many of you have heard about the very sad thing that happened last night. Senator Robert Kennedy was killed. He was shot by a man with a gun. That's a very scary thing to hear about. And a very sad thing. And I know that many of you might be feeling scared or sad or confused right now. That's okay. It's okay to feel scared when scary things happen. It's okay to feel sad when sad things happen. And it's okay to not understand everything that's going on. Sometimes very bad things happen. And we don't always know why. But I want you to know something important. The people who love you are going to take care of you. Your parents, your teachers, your neighbors, they're all going to make sure you're safe. You might have seen your parents crying. You might have heard them talking about this in worried voices. And that might be scary for you. Because when grown-ups are upset, children often feel upset too. But I want you to know that your parents are crying because they're sad about what happened. Not because you did anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. This is not your fault. Sometimes, very sad things happen in the world. And when they do, the best thing we can do is talk about our feelings. Tell the people you love how you're feeling. Tell them if you're scared. Tell them if you're sad. Tell them if you're confused. And the people who love you will listen. Because they care about you. They care about how you feel. I also want you to know that even though this very sad thing happened, there are still many, many good people in the world. There are people who are doctors and nurses who help others. There are people who are teachers who help children learn. There are people who are neighbors who help each other. When something scary happens, we can look for the helpers. There are always people who are helping. And that's what we can do too. We can be helpers. This is a very sad day. But we're going to get through it together. Because that's what people do. We help each other when things are hard. It's okay to be sad today. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel however you're feeling. I'm sad too. And that's okay. Thank you for listening, friends. I'm very proud of you. I'll see you tomorrow. Asterisk. The episode ended. For the first time in the history of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, there was no music. No trolley. No neighborhood of make-believe. Just Fred Rogers talking to children about death and fear and grief. 6.5 minutes. And then it was over. Fred sat in his chair for a long moment after the cameras stopped rolling. His hands were shaking. He'd just done something that could end his career. The crew was silent. No one knew what to say. Finally, Bob Walsh walked over to Fred and put a hand on his shoulder. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Bob said quietly. Fred didn't respond. He just sat there, hoping he'd done the right thing. Asterisk. Within hours, the phone lines at WQED were flooded. Hundreds of calls. Then thousands. The network executives braced themselves for the backlash. For the angry parents demanding that Fred Rogers be taken off the air. But the calls weren't angry. They were grateful. "Thank you for talking to my daughter about this. I didn't know how to explain it to her. But you did. My son has been terrified all day. Your show helped him understand what happened. I've been crying since I heard the news, and I didn't know how to help my children process this. Thank you for being honest with them." Call after call after call. Parents thanking Fred Rogers for doing what they couldn't do, for finding the words when they had none. Letters started arriving too. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. From parents. "Dear Mr. Rogers, thank you for talking to my children about Senator Kennedy. They've been asking questions all day, and I didn't know what to say. But after watching your show, they understood. They're still sad, but they're not scared anymore. Thank you for being brave enough to address this. From teachers, Mr. Rogers, I'm a kindergarten teacher. Today was the hardest day of my career. The children were terrified. Their parents were crying during drop-off. I didn't know what to say to them. Then we watched your episode, and the children started talking. They started asking questions. They started processing their feelings. You gave them permission to be scared, and that changed everything. Thank you." From child psychologists, Mr. Rogers, what you did today was revolutionary. You validated children's feelings in a way that no one else had the courage to do. You didn't shield them from reality, you helped them process it. This is what children need. Thank you for understanding that. Even the network executives, the ones who had tried to stop Fred, called to congratulate him. Fred, we were wrong. What you did was... It was exactly what needed to happen. We're getting calls from all over the country. Parents are thanking us. This is incredible. Fred Rogers was gracious. I'm glad it helped. That's all I wanted. But privately, Fred was exhausted. And he was grieving. Not just for Robert Kennedy, but for the world his children, all children, were growing up in. A world where leaders were murdered. Where violence was everywhere. Where fear was constant. And Fred Rogers understood something that most people didn't. You can't protect children from the world by pretending the world doesn't exist. You can only help them understand it and give them the tools to process it. That's what he'd done. And that's what he would continue to do for the next 33 years. The episode Fred Rogers filmed on June 6, 1968. The Assassination episode was never aired. Again, during his lifetime, Fred made that decision. Deliberately. It was for that moment, he explained years later. That specific moment when children needed to hear those specific words. It wasn't meant to be replayed. It was meant to help children process a tragedy in real time. But the impact of that episode extended far beyond that single day. Fred Rogers had proven something revolutionary. Children could handle difficult, Conversations if adults were willing to have them. Children could process. Tragedy if adults were willing to acknowledge. Children could understand death and fear, and grief if adults were willing to talk about it honestly. In the years that followed, Fred Rogers would continue to break ground in children's television. He talked about divorce, about war, about disability, about racism, about emotions that made adults uncomfortable. And every single time, there were executives who tried to stop him, sponsors who threatened to pull funding, critics who said he was traumatizing children. But Fred Rogers kept talking, because he'd learned something on June 6, 1968. Silence doesn't protect children. Honesty does. In 2001, when the September 11th attacks happened, Fred Rogers, then 73 years old and dying of cancer, came out of retirement one more time to record a message for terrified children. He remembered June 6, 1968. He remembered how scared children had been. He remembered how much it had helped to simply acknowledge their fear. So he did it again. One last time. Because that's who Fred Rogers was. When children were scared, he showed up. And he told them the truth. Robert F. Kennedy was buried on June 8, 1968, at Arlington National Cemetery. Millions mourned. The nation grieved. And slowly, painfully, life went on. But for the children who watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, on June 6, 1968, something had changed. They'd learned that it was okay to be scared, that their feelings mattered, that the adults in their lives would be honest with them, even when the truth was hard. Fred Rogers had given them that gift, not by shielding them from reality, but by helping them face it. Years later, when Fred Rogers was asked about the assassination episode, he was characteristically humble. I just did what needed to be done. Children were scared. Someone needed to talk to them. It happened to be me. But weren't you scared? The interviewer asked. You risked your entire show. Fred was quiet for a moment. Then he said something profound. I was terrified. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent. Children needed to know that the scary things they were feeling were real, that they mattered, that someone understood. If I didn't say that, who would? Do you think it made a difference? Fred smiled. I know it did. Because children told me. For years afterward, adults would come up to me and say, I remember the day you talked about Robert Kennedy. I was 6 years old, and I was terrified. And you helped me understand. That's all I ever wanted. To help. The legacy of June 6, 1968 isn't just about one episode of one television show. It's about what Fred Rogers proved that day. That children deserve honesty. That their feelings deserve validation. That the hardest conversations are often the most important ones. Fred Rogers didn't protect children from the world. He equipped them to face it. He didn't hide tragedy from them. He helped them process it. He didn't pretend everything was fine. He acknowledged that sometimes things are very not fine. And that's okay. That's revolutionary. Not just in 1968, but now, today, always. On June 6, 1968, Fred Rogers broke every rule of children's television. He talked about assassination, about death, about fear. He risked his show, his sponsors, his career, and he did it because children were scared. That's not just brave. That's what love looks like when it costs you something. That's what it means to actually care about children. Not to shield them, but to see them, to hear them, to validate them. That's the Fred Rogers no one talks about. The one who didn't just sing songs and play with puppets, but who stood up and said the hard things when no one else would. The Fred Rogers who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do for a child is simply tell them the truth, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, even when everyone tells you not to. Fred Rogers told the truth, and it changed everything.